Guys, welcome. My name is Mark. I'm one of the pastors here at the church. Really good to have you here, especially if you are new. A special welcome to you. We love having you here as we talk about all things Jesus and the Bible and all of that. So good to have you. I heard that Pastor Kevin last week was talking about me being deported back to Canada. What is with this guy? Why is he so, so mean? So no one wants me to be deported more than Kevin Thompson. I'll tell you that right now. That guy gets to preach more, he gets a promotion, he gets to sell more books. What a loser. Better than being sent back to Arkansas, I guess. So anyway, love Pastor Kevin and love what we're doing in the book of Acts. We are more than halfway through Acts now. We are in Acts 16. If you have a Bible, open up Acts 16. If you don't have a Bible, we always hand you these bulletins and they have the text in there, a spot for you to write notes. We got a lot of work to do this morning. Really glad that you're here. A bunch of stuff to jump into. So here's what I was thinking. The other day I walked into a bookstore. Now, here's the other thing about my voice. So I've been a little under the weather a couple weeks ago. I'm not sick now, but it kind of took my voice away, but I need to continue to preach the next service and the 6 p.m. service. So what I'm gonna do now, all right, is I'm gonna just try to be calm. I don't wanna get excited. I'm just gonna talk at a low pace. And so don't get me excited, okay? I'm just serious, I just gotta chill here. So I'm just gonna chill for my voice. So, do my best. So, I walked to this bookstore the other day and there was this book sitting there called The Wager. And on the cover of this book, there was a big ship, like an old century ship on a big wave. And it said wager, murder, treachery, death, and shipwrecks. And I'm like, yes, and I just bought it, right? I have no idea what it's about. I was just like, oh, this is epic. I'll read it at some point. But I realized, man, that this is literally what the book of Acts is. Right? It's a story. Like for those of you who get bored with church or the Bible, we're talking about an epic tale here. We're talking about like Paul's journey now, shipwrecks, treachery, murder. Like this is crazy. This is like, I was watching Gladiator the other day. Any Gladiator fans in here? All right, let's go. All right, we're getting prepped for Gladiator 2. So I'm watching Gladiator the other day. I might have watched it 2 days in a row. And and there's that scene, and the emperor's standing in front of the gladiators all chained up. And sorry, if you haven't, I'm about to ruin that. If you've seen the movie, of course. If you haven't, it's been out for 25 years, so it's your fault. But he says, a general becomes a slave, and the slave becomes a gladiator, and the gladiator overthrows an emperor. What a story, and I wonder how it's gonna end. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a story. He's a general, becomes a slave, becomes a gladiator, overthrows the empire. This is sick. And I was like, man, this is literally what the book of Acts is like. Right? This is the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul, he's a scholar who becomes a murderer, who becomes a Christian, who becomes a missionary, who goes to, where does the whole book of Acts end? The city of Rome. And in the shadow of the Colosseum, the Apostle Paul is fighting the emperor in the sense of, hey, you say that you're Lord, but I have a different Lord, and his name is Jesus. You say the Roman Empire can bring peace, but I have a different kind of peace, and it's peace that comes through Jesus. The whole book ends with him under house arrest in the Roman Empire, man. This is Gladiator, all right? The Bible's not boring. It's like, let's go. This is the book of Acts, all right? Don't get excited, man. Chill. Thank you. Good reminder. All right, here we go. Let's jump into this. Paul, he becomes the hero of this story. The whole story now starts to follow him to the end. He's this guy, he's a missionary, he's going out and he comes to Derbe and then Lystra. Bible's really cool. If you open up maps in the book of Acts, you understand we're talking about the Greek islands now. They start to move around the Greek islands where a disciple named Timothy lives. So this guy named Timothy is young. He's probably 20, 21 years old, and he's with his mother. Now his mother is Jewish and his father is a Gentile or a Greek. So Paul shows up and he wants to start gathering a crew. And he shows up and there's this kid, Timothy, and he's like, okay, the believers at Lystra and Iconium spoke well of him, said he was a good guy. So Paul wanted to take him along in the journey. I want to gather my crew. I want to start to go out, tell people about Jesus. First place they're going to go, Jewish synagogues. And so it says, so he circumcised him. What? Oh, gosh. We were getting along so well, and then all right, so if you're new to church, right? I know this isn't like a normal conversation you have with your friends, all right? But it was back then. They talked about this all the time. Why? Because in the Jewish religion, God had showed up to Abraham and said, hey, listen, how are we gonna know who the covenant people of God are? The covenant people of God, they have circumcision. You circumcise all the males when they're 8 days old. You circumcise them, and that will be a symbol that you are part of the covenant people of God, that you are going to heaven. And so that's the Jewish idea. So that culture, you had to be circumcised, and that was like a telltale sign that you were saved. Now, I don't know how they knew all this all the time. I don't know if they had like greeters outside at the church that were like, hey, lift your kilt up. All right, you're good. Next. Like, I don't know. I don't know how they knew all this, but all of a sudden they knew it. So Paul circumcised him because the Jews who lived in that area, for they all knew that his father was a Greek. So Paul wants Timothy to be able to reach these Jews, but he knows if he's not circumcised, they're not going to listen to what he has to say. Notice this, it's very important. He's not doing it for a salvation thing. He's doing it for a ministry qualification, not a salvation qualification. In fact, he writes the whole book of Galatians to say you don't need to be circumcised to become a believer. You don't need to be circumcised to go to heaven because all the people were saying that you did. And so he's saying, no, that's not a thing anymore. But he's saying it in regard to the mission. I need these people to listen to you, and they're not going to listen to you unless you do this thing. Now, here's the big principle for you and I as you're taking notes. First big principle of this is, man, like Timothy was willing to do a painful thing in order to reach people for Christ, right? He was willing to do something that made him very uncomfortable. Like this is pain. When you're 8 days old, this isn't uncomfortable. Well, it probably, I don't know, it probably is. But when you're 20 years old, this is definitely uncomfortable, right? This is painful. It's like Paul, all right, let's go to the Jews now. I don't know if that's the way it was done. Probably a little more surgical than that, but we need you to do this really uncomfortable, painful thing so that you can go for the sake of the mission of Christ. And the question is, are you willing to do uncomfortable things so that more people meet Jesus? Right? Are you willing to do the uncomfortable things? Are you willing to do things about your life that make you feel uncomfortable? You get stretched all for the glory of Christ. Are you willing? There's some of you, okay, do we have hunters? Any of you hunters? All right, you can be proud, all right? You don't have to be ashamed of that, all right? We need food, all right? So good. So we got some hunters. Question is, people who hunt, they love hunting, right? They're like obsessed with this, like hunting. I go on the hunt, I would kill the thing, and there's a hunt. I got this gun, I want to talk about guns. I got a shiny one, I got a dull one, I got a ring, I got a sniper, all right? All this kind of stuff. And they get jacked up about hunting. They're hunters. Now, would you be willing to give up your passion for hunting in order to reach a new age person? A person who doesn't believe in killing anything. You know, we're all just one avatar spirit connected to the branches and the soil. And would you be willing to give up hunting because they're not going to listen to you unless they respect how you act, right? Those of you who like steak in here, right? Hamburger, steak, meat, let's go. So good. Would you be willing to give up meat in order to reach a Buddhist for Christ? If you're going into that culture and you've got to give up these things that you love. This is like going into a Muslim culture and wearing a head covering in order to respect the culture so that you can reach them for Jesus. This is like, would you be willing to move to the slums of our city in order to reach people who live there? Because now you got to live there. And you gotta, maybe there's crime and there's difficulty and there's fear. Are you willing to do the kinds of things, the incarnational, contextual, missiological movements where you go into a people group in order to reach them for Christ, even when it's tough, even when it's difficult? Are you doing this in your life? This is what I had to do to come here. To be a missionary to you, I had to leave Canada and come down here to Sacramento, where it's brown, very brown. And hang out with y'all and learn the American ways. So I'm doing my best to be like you, to come here as a missionary. So now when I travel around the world, instead of going as a polite, quiet Canadian, I go like a loud, aggressive person. Hashtag America, right? Yeah. Just like you guys. Are you willing to do the kinds of things that would stretch you in order to reach a people group that needs you to actually reach them. That's what the Apostle Paul is doing. And here's what I love about it. His mother's Jewish, his dad's a Gentile, which means his mother's super conservative and his dad's super liberal. And what I love about it is Timothy represents as a person the exact problem that Paul is going to spend the rest of his life writing letters to churches about. The fact that these churches are made up of half Jews, half Gentiles, and they're not getting along. They don't like the same things. They hate each other in these small churches. Like these churches that Paul starts, they're not 15,000 people like Bayside. They're 40, 50 people in a room. And half of them are Jews with all of their stuff, and half of them are Gentiles, and they're coming together and they're fighting, right? Have you ever been in a small group during a political season and half of you were liberals and half of you were conservatives, right? And you got there and everything was so great. You brought your coffee and your little cookies. And then someone said, who'd you vote for? And it's like, you did what? And everyone's fighting each other, right? And you pull up and you see the sign on the lawn and you're like, how could they ever vote for them? And you start fighting. Then half the group breaks off and they start a different group, right? Liberals, conservatives, this is exactly, and Paul has to write these letters and go, guys, the gospel of Jesus Christ trumps all of these politics. The gospel of Jesus makes you united. Stop fighting. We're in this together. We got to go after this for the sake of the world. Stop fighting over nonsense. This is exactly what he's got to do. And Timothy represents both worlds because he has both of these things in his life and they come together in one person. It's beautiful. Now, here's what I love about it. He's gathering the crew and they start traveling from town to town. Now we're cooking, all right? Like picture, there's music now. This is like the scene in the movie where the guy starts to gather the crew because they're gonna do a heist, right? They're gonna rob a bank. This is Ocean's 11, right? They're gonna go to Vegas. And so you gotta go after, you gotta get the forger and you gotta get the gymnast and you gotta get the guy who can get us into the thing. And this is Inception. This is every bank robbery movie. He's gotta gather his crew up in order to do this thing. So they start going from town to town and they start talking about Jesus so that people will obey. And what happens is they were strengthened in the faith and they grew daily in numbers. So here's the question. The Apostle Paul starts a missionary journey. He starts going to these towns so that more and more people meet Jesus. This is what's beautiful about it. How do you get, this is the question we should be asking, what the Apostle Paul was asking. How do we get an idea to spread so that more people buy into it? How do we get more people to believe in Jesus? How do we get the most beautiful news in the world, the gospel, to spread like a virus? All right, this is what, if you read Malcolm Gladwell's book, he put it out 20 years ago called The Tipping Point. He talks about the idea that there are social epidemics. There are things that go viral, ideas that get into the water of a society that people begin to believe and then they begin to behave. A social epidemic, right? So the word epidemic comes from two Greek words, epi, into, and demos, which is people, into the people. That's what an epidemic is. I was trying to think of a modern example of an epidemic. All right, so obviously we just went through the COVID, the virus. What did it do? It spread. It spread very quickly. It spread to large amounts of people. Why? Because now we have airports and things travel. Viruses travel through airports. They don't just stay in one geography anymore, and they move around and they travel. And you get infected, and then you get infected, and then you get infected. And why do you get infected? Because of proximity. This is very important. Why? How would I ever give you COVID during that time? So what did we do? We had all these things we were coming up with. Distances from each other. We put little pool foams down in the Gulf holes so that your hand didn't go too deep into the hand. Saved millions of lives, by the way. We were just coming up with stuff. We didn't want, because proximity caused you to get the virus. That's what happens with viruses, right? Proximity. The reason I gave COVID to Erin is because she's my wife and I was very close with her in ways that I'm not with anybody else. That proximity is going to transfer a virus. The same is true about social viruses. How does an idea begin to move around? Proximity to each other. Okay, who is this guy right here? Paul Revere, look at this. You guys are good Americans. You went to school, you learned about the history of America, and this is Paul Revere, all right? And so I, as a missionary to you, have studied Mr. Revere. Paul Revere, what did he do? He was a man who was a silversmith. And of course, the story goes, a little boy hears that the British are talking about invading these certain towns in Boston. And so one of the British soldiers says to the other one, tomorrow these towns will have hell to pay, is what he says. And the little boy says, what am I gonna do? They're gonna invade these towns. So he runs to the silversmith, Paul Revere, and he tells Paul, the redcoats are gonna come. The British are coming to these towns. We've gotta do something about it. So Paul Revere jumps on his horse and he does the famous midnight ride. And he goes to all these towns all over Boston and he screams and he goes to the doors and he knocks and he says, the British are coming, the British are coming. And everybody starts ringing bells and they all come together and they grab their weapons and the whole town gets ready and they all stand there. By the time the British come in the morning, they have this militia. And in that moment, they start to fight the British and beat them and the American Revolution has begun. Let's go. Paul Revere lights a fire. Now, do you know this man? No. This guy's name is William Dawes. William Dawes did the same ride on the same night as Paul Revere. Him and Paul hung out and said, we heard the British are coming. Paul Revere said, I'm gonna go this way. William, you go that way, and you tell all the towns. And so William Dawes did his midnight ride, and he ran to all of these towns, and he said, the British are coming, the British are coming. And by the time the British showed up at those towns in the morning, none of the people cared. They didn't do anything, and the British killed them all. Nobody listened to William Dawes. And what was the reason? I'll tell you why. Paul Revere was connected. He knew everybody in those towns. He was in every fishing club, every card club, every political group. He was already so part of their lives and their culture that the minute he showed up, they listened to everything Paul said because he was already in their lives. William Dawes, on the other hand, knew nobody, and so nobody cared what he had to say. And here's my point. You want a social epidemic to spread like a virus? We better make sure that we're in the lives of people before we think they're gonna value the gospel that we have for them. Some of you are not in the lives of non-Christians at all. You hang out in church groups and church events and church things 7 days a week, and the only people you know are Christians. And whenever you hear a swear word, you go, "Ooh!" Oh, I almost had a heart attack. What is that foreign word? That's why I love to be on the golf course. I meet all the non-Christians and they swear for 9 holes. And then they say, what do you do for a living? And I say, I'm a pastor. And then they say, oh, I'm sorry about all the swearing. Me too. Do you have any non-Christian friends? Do you have anybody who you're in their life actually ministering to them? Because here's the thing, the only way anyone's gonna accept the gospel from you is if you're walking with them and loving them now. Now, in their life, caring about them, pastoring them, shepherding them. That's how it works. I remember there was probably a 21-year-old kid started coming to our church that we had started in Vancouver a bunch of years ago. And he was struggling with his sexuality and he was struggling with his gender. He was going through a real time of complication in his life. And so I said, let's go out for coffee and talk about the Bible together. And so for 2 or 3 weeks in a row, we sat in a coffee shop and talked about Jesus and the Bible and what it has to say about all these things. And 3 weeks later, that kid gave his life to Jesus and we baptized him in the Pacific Ocean. Why? Because I didn't say, oh my goodness, you're struggling with those kind of things. Oh my, I just write those people off. They don't believe like me. They don't think like me. They don't vote like me. They don't act like me. Let's not spend any time with them. I said, no. Let me hang out with you. Let me walk with you. Let me journey with you. Let me get into your life. And that resulted in someone treasuring Jesus. That's what we need to do, but oftentimes we don't at all. I used to smoke weed a bunch when I was 16, 17 years old. And we used to go over to my friend's house and we used to close the garage and everyone would smoke weed and we'd talk about all the deep things of the universe. Is there God? Is there salvation? Is there all these things? And we'd hotbox the room. And we'd all talk about these things. And then one day, a guy named Chris came to woodworking class and he told me about Jesus. And I gave my life to Christ and all my affections changed. I repented of my sin and I gave my life to Jesus and said, this is what. Now here's the next Friday came along and everyone gathered in my buddy's garage to talk and smoke. And you know where I was? Not in my bedroom hiding, right there with them. I got a little vent, opened up the vent a little bit. And I said, you wanna know? We used to talk about these things, heaven, hell, salvation, God, and we didn't have any answers, but now I have answers, and let me share them with you. I was in their life, and they would look at me and say, you know what, we don't believe in anything that you have to say, but when we look at you and we look at your life, we start to wonder if God really does exist. But we don't have those conversations if I'm removed from their world. Every single one of us needs to be thinking, what is it that God has actually called me to do? And here's what I love about it. He takes Timothy. Timothy's young, and they start to go and they start to tell people about Jesus. They travel from town to town. This wasn't easy. This was walking for weeks on end, telling people about Jesus. Why? Because they're passionate. They actually treasure Christ. And here's the thing, honestly, when you evaluate your life, and I'm preaching to myself here, I'm not trying to be judgmental of you. When you look at your life, the amount of non-Christians that you hang out with, the amount of people that you get to tell about Jesus, is this part of your life? Because if it's not, you have to honestly ask the question whether you really treasure Jesus. Here's what I mean. You know what happens when you really love something? You share it. That's what it is. You know how I know? Because as I was mentioning, this week, you know what I did? I forced my 13-year-old daughter to watch Gladiator. Right? I said, baby, Gladiator 2 is coming out. Let's sit down. We're going to watch Gladiator. She's like, all right. So we sit down. I'm like, you don't understand, man. A general becomes a slave, becomes a gladiator, throws over the Roman Empire. We're going to watch Gladiator. We sat down, and I mean, it was epic, man. You could hear the boom, 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 dun, 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 just cutting heads off, and it was amazing. So we watched Gladiator. She goes, that was good, Dad. Now, you're gonna watch one of my shows. Said, is there killing? Is there swords and sandals? And Roman Republic commentary on politics? No. But you made me watch one of yours, now you watch one of mine. And so we're in this thing now. She watches one of mine, and I watch one of her shows. And it's genius, and we go back and forth and back and forth. Next up, Braveheart. It's coming down the pike. We're just gonna hit all the hits. Boom, boom, boom. She doesn't know yet. Freedom! All right, so. Now why do I show her these movies, and then why does she then show me her shows? Why? Because it's not even real yet. I don't really truly love it yet until I've shared it with someone. That's why you make people sit down and watch that YouTube video. No, you gotta watch it, Tom. Look at this. And you're like, oh, it's only 8 minutes. Awesome. Right? It's like, dude, shut it off. I don't care. Why do you do that? You share your favorite movies, your favorite shows, your favorite songs, your favorite music, your favorite pictures. Why? Because when you really love something, it's not even consummated yet until you share it. Until you tell someone, I want you to enter into this experience with me. That's what's driving them. They're going around and they're telling everybody they can about Jesus, and it's a beautiful thing. Now here's what happens next. Paul and his companions traveled throughout the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been kept by the Holy Spirit from preaching the word in the province of Asia. This is fascinating. Now, what are we talking about? They want to go to Asia, and yet they're kept by the Holy Spirit out of Asia. Why would that be? Here's the second principle for your notes. Understand that you have to make decisions and be guided in your life, not just by you and your small little brain, but by the Holy Spirit. And if you try to make decisions in your life, who you're gonna date, where you're gonna go to school, what you're gonna do for a job, whether you should take that promotion, what stock you should invest in, and you do it with all the information, all the rationale of who you think you are and what you know and your experience and your history, and you make decisions about life, then you might end up trying to go to Asia when God's going, I don't want you to go there. Actually, here's who you're supposed to ask about these decisions in your life. You have to involve the Holy Spirit in the decisions you make in your life. And if you don't, you're leaving a lot on the table. Here's what I mean. So, a few years ago, we do these golf tournaments every year up at our church in Vancouver, and we would raise money for different organizations. And so one day we were like, okay, we're gonna do a golf tournament, and my team said this: we've been all praying and thinking, and here's what God is telling us. We should do a golf tournament where we raise in one day $1 million. $1 million in one day at a golf tournament. I'm like, guys, come on. And they're like, no, I think we can do it. And I was going that day to go and meet with one of the big generous donors of our church. Awesome guy, he loved our church, he loved these kind of things, and he was very generous. And so I had a lunch with him to meet him to talk about the golf tournament. And my whole team said, so here's what we need you to do. We need you to ask him for half of the million right now to just get the ball rolling. I'm like, you want me to go out for lunch with a guy and ask him for $500,000? Are you crazy? I said, here's what I'm gonna do. The golf tournament, all we're gonna do is try to raise $500,000, and I'll go out for lunch with them today and ask them for $250,000. That's what I'm gonna do. Anything above that's crazy. You're crazy, you're all crazy. So they said, okay, fine, go do it. But listen, at least on your 30-minute drive to lunch, pray about it. So I drove 30 minutes, and as I said, okay, fine, Holy Spirit, what do you want me to do here? And I walked into the lunch, and I walk in, he's got his whole finance team around him. I walk into the lunch, we're sitting there, he has the same table every day, he has the same lunch, and we go in and we chat. He's like, what's going on in life? And we go. Finally, he goes, okay, what are we gonna do for the golf tournament? I said, oh, we got this great place in Uganda, we're gonna do it. He says, cool. I said, so what do you want from me? And I was just about to, $250,000, that's a lot of money. I was even starting to go, maybe I go 100. And I said, here's what I need from you. I need, and then it just came out. $500,000. What? $500,000? What are you talking? What is it we're gonna do? And I said, oh, it's gonna be fantastic. We're gonna do this in Uganda and give these people 30 years at the low, low price of $500,000. And he's like, I don't know. He said, hey, server. And there's a server girl walking by. He said, come over here for a sec. She walks over. He's like, hey, tell her what you just asked me for. I'm like, $500,000? She's like, whoa, what's that for? And I said, well, it's this thing in Uganda, da-da-da-da. And she goes, well, sir, I think you should do it. And she walks away, and he looks at her, and he looks at me, he's like, okay, deal. And he shook my hand at lunch that day and said, $500,000 is yours. How much blessing do you leave on the table by not including the Spirit in your life? You make decisions with your small information, and you think you're so smart about everything, and yet the Holy Spirit wants to speak to you about your life, about what you're supposed to do, about your sin, about your righteousness, about every decision. He wants to be included. And then here's what happens, verse 7. When they came to the border of Mysia, they tried to enter Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus, only 2 or 3 times in the Whole New Testament is that phrase used, the Spirit of Jesus, would, not allow them to. This is fascinating. Jesus doesn't want them to go to Asia. Why? Here's what happens. So they passed by Mysia and went to Troas. During the night, Paul had a vision of a man of Macedonia standing and begging him, come over to Macedonia and help us. Macedonia is it's Europe. It's where Christianity would go and be the main force of religion for 1,500 years. And Macedonia would send out missionaries to every continent in the world and change the entire scope of history by going to Europe. After Paul had seen the vision, we got ready at once. We is Luke now writing. He joins up with the team. We got ready at once to leave for Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. So here's the deal. I want to go to Asia. Jesus says, no, I want you to go to Macedonia, because here's the principle. Sometimes God guides you in life, not by a door that he opens, but by a door that he closes. Think about that. How many times in your life do you look and go, okay, God, I want you to guide me here. I want you to guide me there. But he closes a door, he shuts it. And you don't know why until later. When he says, now I'm gonna use you like this. The great missionary David Livingstone, who changed the continent of Africa and impacted millions of people with the gospel, originally wanted to go to China. He said, that's my goal. I'm gonna become a missionary in China. Never happened. He ends up going to Africa as a secondary choice. Changes the world. You know C.S. Lewis? I've mentioned him a few times. You know what C.S. Lewis really wanted to do with his life? He wanted to be a poet. C.S. Lewis wanted to be a poet. That's what he wanted to become famous for. That's what he wanted to do with his life. He wanted to write poetry, but no one was interested in his poetry. He actually probably wasn't a very great poet. So he did poetry and he did poetry, but it didn't pay the bills. So you know what he did? In the meantime, he wrote stuff like the Chronicles of Narnia and Mere Christianity and Screwtape Letters, Until We Have Faces, which people say is one of the great writings of the 20th century, even secular people, the recasting of Cupid and Psyche. And he writes all these brilliant, he's an Oxford professor, bored. He does all of that, but he wants to be a poet. See, he does all of this in the meantime because God is closing the door. You know what I want to do when I grow up? You know what I want to do? I want to be a writer. That's my passion in life, to write. You know what I do in the meantime? This. Hang out with y'all. Try to think up illustrations to keep you from going to sleep. And it's a burden, and it's hard, and it's tough. But it's what puts food on the table. In the meantime, and maybe God will use it a little bit, but I really want to, this is what's fascinating in life. God closes doors all the time in order to save you. It's called the problem of good. Listen, philosophers call it the problem of good. Here's the problem of good. Yes, the world is evil and corrupt and it's filled with terrible things, but we don't know whether God is holding back 99.9% of bad that could be happening in the universe. You see, you don't know the car accident that you avoided last weekend. You don't know the by inches you were from making a really bad decision in your life that could derail everything. The things that God, the doors he closed. So when I was in grade 9, I had a friend group that were like my best friends. One of them was named Rob, one of them was named David. And we used to do little drugs and try to figure out how to get money for it. And so we went down to this parking lot. We took a rock because we didn't have any money. And we threw it through a car window. And we took all the money from the car and we ran away and we said, okay, now we got some money. And then David said, no, let's go to the next parking lot. There's another car over there. I know we could throw a window through and get some more money. And we started walking toward it. And then I was like, oh, you know what? I got to go home. I'll hook up with you later. I'll meet up later with you. I got to go home for a couple hours, check in with my mom so she doesn't get suspicious. I'm going to go right, you go left, and we'll hook up later. We'll connect later. Okay, great. So 3 hours later, I get a call from David's mother. David went over here to the parking lot. He threw a rock through a window. He stole the money, and he's been arrested. They're thinking about juvie. And his life from that moment went downhill. He started getting in all kinds of trouble. Deeper and deeper drugs. I got a text 2 weeks ago from Rob with a picture of 44-year-old David, and it simply said, he's gone. He overdosed. My best friend in high school, the guy that went left when I went right in the parking lot. You have no idea how often God shuts a door to save you, to love you, to have you here, to draw you to himself in a way that says, I want to do what is best for you. I'm going to shut down these spots because I want the gospel to go somewhere else. Literally the reason I work here. You know why I work here? Because I came down here to preach the Bible conference in 2022 and you gave me COVID. That's why. That's why. I was living in Canada. We were still in our houses, so we were all safe. Couldn't go out. And then Ray said, can you come down here and come preach the Bible conference? We want to make sure people during COVID have the Bible as the center of their life. I said, okay, I'll come down. And at this point, we're all wearing masks. We're all staying away from each other, making sure. And I come down here and I walked out on this stage. And I walked out and it was the Wild West down here. All right? Yo, we're just walking around. No masks, talking to each other, shaking. They did a meet and greet. I was like, I hadn't touched another person in 2 years. Shaking hands, kissing babies. I'm like, what is happening? And I got up here and I looked out at all of you and I said, this is a super spreader event. I feel myself getting COVID just by looking at you and all your liberty and freedom. And then 2 days later, I had to get a COVID test to jump on a plane and go home to my family in Vancouver. And I go to the parking lot of Galleria Mall, and they give me the COVID test, shove it up my nose. And she comes back 15 minutes later. She says, I'm sorry to tell you, sir, you have COVID. I said, okay, well, that doesn't surprise me looking out at these people. What do I got to do? And she said, well, government of Canada says you can't come back for 11 days. 11 days? I got a life. What am I going to do? And so a friend of ours down here, he had a house, lived on a golf course. He said, come stay with me for the 11 days. You can hunker down here. So I went over there and I stayed with him 11 days. We played golf every day. And I called my wife who had COVID as well, and she was sitting in a bedroom. Our kids wouldn't even be around her. They would slide her food under the door. She's like, man, this is miserable. And I'm like, yes, this is totally miserable. Hold on. What'd you say? So during this time, I'm sitting at his house, and the Holy Spirit starts to speak to me, to him, to a group, 2 or 3 people. And he begins to say, what if coming down here is actually the next part of your story? And it was really hard. And there was a lot of questions to be asked. He literally closed a border and I couldn't get home to direct me somewhere else. This is how good he is, guys. He is so good. He's smarter than you. He's more powerful than you. He's wonderfully good and has so many great things planned for you, but you got to trust him more than you trust yourself, more than you trust your own brain and your own logic. You got to trust him because he's got you and will guide you and will lead you. He's that good. He reigns and you don't. And that's the most beautiful news of all. Let's stand up for a second. I want to pray for you. Let's everyone close our eyes. Father, we are grateful you are this good. We are grateful that you not only open doors, but you close them. We are grateful that you stir in us a passion that other people would meet Jesus in a way that maybe we never would according to just our natural impulses. But Lord, you supernaturally, by the Spirit of Jesus, speak to us. And I pray in this room right now, or anybody watching online, I pray in this moment we can hear your voice. You say in the Gospel of John that my sheep can actually hear my voice, and maybe some of us haven't heard your voice in a long time. I pray that you would speak and that we would hear and that we would listen, that we would be intentional about that 1 or 2 people that you're putting in our life so that they would meet Jesus. They would actually cross the line and come to Christ. For that decision that we have to make about dating that person or taking that job or moving here or not moving here or investing this, whatever it is, you would speak and we would hear and be better for it. We are very thankful in this moment that you reign and we don't. Let that change us. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching our Bayside online service. We're so glad that you're actually part of our church, which you are, even though you're watching from all over the world, and we have people literally watching from all over the world. You are part of our family, and we want to get to know you. So please make sure you get in touch with us. Let us know your story. We'd love to hear you and serve you in any way we can. Also, part of what drives the way we connect as a church globally is giving. And so if you're part of our family, we would love you to start giving to our church. Those resources, we steward them to reach people all over the world. And we hear amazing stories about what Jesus is doing with your resources. So if you already give, thank you. If not, you can start giving. We would love that. And then finally, we have all kinds of stuff we do. We have a podcast network. We have like 10 podcasts that address a whole bunch of different things in your life. So if you're a podcaster, join us in the Thrive Podcast Network. We'd love to serve you. We've got a ton of stuff there. We just want to make sure that you feel part of our family. So we love you. Thank you so much for being part of this family, and we will see you next week.